in case you need to drop out, in case you need, to run off at any time, we'll make this recording public, so you can, have a look at some of it live, and then maybe later on catch up with anything that you missed. So we're already recording now, so right now, let me switch to my slides. So once again, welcome everyone. My name is Johnny Darkwah. I'm from Gauss Algorithmic. And today's presentation is about something which is really close to my heart. We're calling it The New Era is Here. And we're going to be speaking a lot about modern data infrastructures. Now, just to present myself here a bit, I'm the CEO of Gauss Algorithmic. Like I said, by heart, I'm a solution architect. And I've mostly done work, let's say in the last 14 years, it's probably going to be 14 years right now, in telecommunications, where I've been fortunate enough to, be a part of many data infrastructure projects, both with, let's say, small players, but also with very large mobile operators, especially around the world, right? So I've just listed out here a couple of projects which I've been recently, and also maybe further back in the past. And the data infrastructure topic has always been something which I've followed very closely. It's let's say from what we do, one of my passions. And to present Gauss Algorithmic a bit, what Gauss Algorithmic does, in case you don't know us, we help companies quickly adopt AI technologies to help them solve their business problems, right? The way we do that, well, we try to do that, usually we try to get customers very quickly into the mix, try to get them to understand what's happening. At the same time, we understand that when you're starting with something like this, that it's not really sensible to build a team. It may be more sensible to do something streamlined, just to see if the technology is really working for you. So that's how we help companies. And I want to start off with maybe a warm-up question. Firstly, if the polling and the question and answering system is working. So as of the warm-up question in the Q&A, I think, yes, in the poll sections in the chat room, you will be able to see now the first question. And the first question, which I want to ask everyone here, is, from which industries do you think Gauss Algorithmic is providing AI solutions, right? So a couple of answers already coming in. I hope everyone sees this, right? So you should be seeing the results live as they come in, right? So it's a multi-choice question, and it looks like a lot of people have already been answering. So we have about 25 responses. It's very quickly ramping up. So we'll give it another maybe 10, 20 seconds. So just, so if anyone doesn't see it, so the answers are telecommunications, banking and insurance, gastronomy, health and sports, pharma and gaming, or all of the above. Now, most of you are answering all of the above. Second right now is telecommunications. Banking and insurance is in third place. All good. So thank you. You can still keep answering. So thank you for your responses. The correct answer is all of the above. So G was correct. So yeah, we're all in these industries. So we're really cross industry. We try to help because AI is going to be such a broad topic that we try to help anyone with the need to do better with their data, or who wants to adopt these sort of technologies inside of their industry. So thank you again for voting. Now, why we're calling it the new era, right? So I'm going to start off the webinar today with a story, right? The story which I want to tell you is when I actually came across, let's say, the first time when there was a certain technology shift, right? And for me, this happened back in my previous job, where I was working for a company who was a core provider of messaging technologies in the telecommunication industry. So that was like SMS, MMS, voicemail. And one of our key customers was Sprint in the US, right? So Sprint, which is headquartered in Kansas City, was a key customer, and we delivered predominantly the SMS center solution, right? And for those who maybe don't know who Sprint is, just a quick brief on them. So they're a mobile operator in the United States. They got 60 million customers. Revenue is over 33 billion, as I last have seen. And at the time when we were working with them, we saw hourly peaks of SMS messages over 90 million per hour, right? So it's a really heavy traffic environment, and the US users typically use the service quite a lot. Now, my job there was, on top of these SMS platforms, to build out a data warehouse, right? So back in the day, the go-to technology was Oracle. So we had the Oracle RIA application cluster running at Sprint, and the project went pretty smoothly, and Sprint started pushing data into it. We did about 20,000 records per second sustainably. Most SMS coming out of the CDMA network. And the key uses of that data warehouse were business intelligence reporting. That was an SAP Business Objects platform, if I remember correctly. And the second use case was a search tool, which was more dedicated to troubleshooting teams and people needing to find out specific problems. Right. So after the initial deployment, everything went well, and as Sprint really liked the technology, they started to to purchase more SMS centers, right? So gradually, the company became kind of the sole provider of the SMS technology, and that caused a significant increase in the traffic that we were supposed to handle with this sort of system. So around the 50,000 record per second mark, we started to get into some trouble, right? So what eventually happened is that this load kind of slowed down the system in a way that we had to do quite a lot of optimization tasks, right? So we had to limit the amount of reports, which could run concurrently. We had to, work with backlogs of data. So eventually the reports, which were meant to be on a daily basis, were delayed for 2 days. And in the search tool, we had to limit the data all the way down to 48 hours, which was the history. So if the troubleshooting teams needed after 3 days to search something, which was actually 3 days ago or even more, then it was not really possible, right? And indexing was just done on specific fields. So, a very limited user experience for the customer. And they were getting pretty frustrated, right? But overall, we were also getting quite frustrated because anytime the system kind of stopped, we started creating backlog, and, it was endless nights fixing problems, reprocessing backlogs. So we saw that this solution was, in this way, not sustainable. So what did we do with that, right? So eventually we got into the situation where we said, okay, hey, let's try to solve this in a certain way. And the first idea which our project management had in the back of the day was, let's just buy new hardware, right? Let's just buy better hardware which could maybe handle the traffic, right? But luckily, Sprint wasn't stupid, and they asked us to do a load test, right? So that we can show that the performance will be okay. So I was tasked with that, and we borrowed hardware out of HP, and we did basically load tests, basically going from a single node to as many nodes as we possibly could, right? So continuously adding new and new servers just to see if the performance was okay. Now, what happened is that initially, well, interestingly enough, the single node on the Oracle system was actually doing better than a free node system. But when we got to the fourth and fifth node, we can see a gradual scale of performance going up, right? But once we got to the eighth node, we practically hit the hardware limits of that system, right? So we saw that the disk throughput was reached to practically the maximum, right? And when we started to add a 9th, 10th, 11th node to the system, then on contraire, it was counterproductive, and the performance of that system was starting to degrade, right? So the solution of getting just bigger hardware wasn't really solving the problem. So we had to look elsewhere. So we decided to go with the team back to the basics, and with that, we looked at the workloads which were on that system. So the system, as it was multifunction, carried two types of workloads. Now, this may be a bit more technical, but I'll try to explain. So OLTP is online transactional processing. OLAP, or also known as OLAP, is online analytical processing. Now, the difference between the two is how you approach basically the data, right, in terms of reads and writes, especially. So on one side, the OLTP is more like transactional stuff, right? So it's kind of like, hey, show me the user with ID 1234566, right? You put that query in, you get a very simple result out. Now, the online analytical processing is a bit contradictory to that. So you ask a query, say, hey, get me all the users which have iPhones and Samsung Galaxies, right? So with that sort of query, you have, let's say, fewer transactions because it's mostly dedicated to maybe reporting, dashboarding, but you have larger payloads, and it's quite heavy, especially when it comes to reading from the disks. So as we had one system and these two workloads were kind of contradicting and competing for resources on that one platform, well, the easy solution out of this was basically for Sprint to have two systems, right? So at the end of the day, we actually did really physically build two Oracle clusters, and the traffic was sent to both at 50,000 per second rate. And eventually we solved some of the problems, right? But solving the problem this way eventually also brought new problems to the mix, right? So although the customer was happy, it wasn't long when we had to tell them that okay, we created two systems, but we doubled your licensing costs for Oracle, right? Which for those of you who have worked with Oracle would probably understand that this is not the cheapest software out there. And though the load test was done on a specific load, it wasn't guaranteed that this couldn't grow, right? So we had customers elsewhere, like Telkomsel in Indonesia, who were actually doing double this sort of traffic. It was just working for the fact that they were just going through, let's say, the online analytical processing part, right? So in the long term, it wasn't sustainable. Short term, we fixed it, but long term, it was still a problem. But the good thing about the story is that it actually opened the way and opened the discussion within the company to start looking at alternative technologies. So The technology architecture limited us to provide the right user experience to Sprint US. So what was out there? At the time, we were looking at three specific technologies. We were looking at Apache HBase, Hadoop, and Elastic. And long story short is that eventually, for some of these technologies, there were new products created in the company. But on a side note, it was also the fact that I kind of, really liked this technology, and it took me from that company to Gauss Algorithmic. So kind of a backstory to that. So this was roughly back between 2010 and 2014, right? So let's say some 7 to 10 years ago. And that was kind of the shift from the traditional relational databases to this new world, which was mostly known by the name big data, right? The reason why I'm talking about this story is that I'm seeing very similar shifts and very similar kind of patterns that I saw kind of 10 years ago that I'm seeing right now in the market when we are looking at new sort of technologies. So the same sort of shift, I believe, is really happening now, as there are different demands to the data, there are different use cases. There's the emergence of artificial intelligence going really like mainstream. So it's changing kind of the landscape, and it's not like the fact that Hadoop has completely disappeared or Oracle has completely disappeared. I mean, those technologies are still there today, right? And for many customers, even here that we have, they're still doing some great work, right? But to go ahead with newer use cases, it's probably the right time to have a look at what's there in the market and how that can help. So yeah, this was some of the technology. So Apache HBase, Hadoop, and Elastic. And I want to open another poll, right? And maybe I hope this doesn't create a conflict in the chat room, right? Because it's a bit of a controversial question. So I'd like your opinion on what's for you, let's say, been in the last decade the single best data technology that you've come across, right? So if we can open the poll, let me see. Yeah. So I'm starting the poll. So you can answer freely, right? And basically, for me, if I look back at the 10 years, I think personally the best technology which I've seen has been Apache Kafka, right? So from my point of view, I think really that has been, at least for us in Gauss and maybe also in my previous company, kind of a game-changing technology. So we see quite a few responses. So I'm seeing responses, and I'm not seeing the actual responses. So I don't know if we can get those results somewhere visible. So yeah, a couple more coming in. So maybe Peter can, my colleague Peter can maybe, once it's gone through a bit, maybe some of the results can be shared. So I'm not saying the exact answers, right? But Peter will try to share the results for you in either in the chat room or in the poll room, right? So if you've answered, right, thank you for your answer. So we're going to continue. Now, for whatever technology you chose, there's always been a reason to transfer to that technology. And as we're seeing various trends, right? So I try to, put out onto the slide some of the trends that we're seeing, right? So there are quite a few, and some maybe are less important, and some maybe are more important from an architectural perspective. But yeah, just to name a couple of, a very popular topic is now data warehouse as a service. We're going to talk about that a bit today. Um, a very controversial topic, which which I personally like to discuss and argue about, is the end of the data mart, right? So it's kind of if you've never heard about it, it's kind of saying, the technology is so fast, kind of on top of original raw data, that it comes to question is if we actually need to do data marts anymore, right? So there are kind of methodologies to do that. If you combine that maybe with a data catalog and a business glossary, so well, really the jury's out on that, and it's an interesting topic to discuss, and we like to bring it up when we talk to customers. And yeah, and also a very strong topic, for example, has been data governance tools and quality tools, right? So they've been here in the past, but they've been kind of put to the side and shadowed. And I think in the last, I would say even a year, it's quite grown in popularity, and we're more or less discussing it in every kind of infrastructure meeting that we have, right? So these are some of the topics, and we'll cover a couple of details and some examples later on. But the way we kind of do things in Gauss, right? So we start with questions. So the reason why you guys came here in the first place, I believe, is is kind of to understand if you actually need to modernize your data infrastructure. If like in the story with Sprint, if you're actually in a situation where the time could be right for you. So how to go about that, right? And the way we do things at Gauss is we always try to start with the customers and go backwards, right? So we have a top-down approach to practically anything that we do. So I wanted to share a couple of topics that we've been discussing with customers in let's say the last year, and what we've been hearing in the market, right? So this is mostly customers coming out of Europe, although we do have customers now in Asia and in the US, but this is predominantly from discussions here in the local region. So this is an oldie but a goldie, right? We have to wait for today's data till tomorrow. Now, this is pretty much an old problem, right? But it still seems to be quite persistent in some of the discussions that we're having, right? And what we're seeing behind that is usually there's a lot of complexity behind the whole architectural schema, right? And maybe it's not down to individual faults, right? So I think kind of the back problem to all of this is waiting kind of too long to modernize, right? So waiting, carrying a lot of history with you, right? And eventually after, let's say, I don't know, 5 years, you kind of realize it's really, really difficult then to get out of that, infrastructure or out of that situation, right? And, things over time become complex, right? So, just to give you an example that we've really seen complex. Now, if you see this picture right here, first, when I saw it, I thought it was some sort of like abstract art or something like that. But if you look closely, this is actually an ERD diagram, so a schema of someone's business data of a real customer here in the Czech Republic, right? So these are actually the small things there are actually tables and connections to those tables. So after years, things can become really complex. It's kind of like the snowball effect, right? So you start out small, you keep on adding things, and if you don't do kind of a cleanup once in a while, you kind of end up with this sort of thing, right? So and don't worry, we're trying to help them, but this is kind of the first thing we saw out there. Now it takes months to add capacity to our warehouse, right? Adding capacity, especially if you're still on-prem, buying hardware is still in this day and age quite complex, right? So you have a buying process, right? And after you go through that rigorous buying process, some of our customers, typically, the vendors come along and say, hey, in order to expand your system, you're going to have to do an upgrade, right? And then you have to do an extra backup. And so you're actually creating another project just to, expand capacity of your system, which you kind of expected some time ago that would, expand easily. So and with that, we're also hearing we don't have the capacity to store all of our data, right? And the reason why I'm mentioning this, that, as we are seeing more and more people interested in artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to machine learning, and these kind of technologies, it's pretty much a disadvantage if you start chucking away any data which could be deemed as interesting or valuable, right, in the past. So this is something that we've been hearing. We cannot respond quickly enough to business needs, right? So this is kind of a topic, again, which has been around like pretty long, and practically, well, the reasons are still the same, right? So kind of the technology which is in place is not able to keep up with the demands of the business. So the technology limitations, right, then which kind of lead to hacker solutions, right? And the most frequent problem probably that we've seen is that just to start off the project, you're waiting like for weeks or even months to have someone prepare the data so that you can integrate it into the process, right? So this is still here, and it's quite common. We process data we need elsewhere. This is coming out. Well, this came to us as quite interesting. I mean, we kind of knew it was there, but it's being talked about these days a bit more public, right? So this is kind of those shadow IT projects, right? So there's this team, which is the data warehouse team, and then there's, let's say, marketing, right? And the data warehouse team tries to provide everyone the data in some sort of form. But for maybe the marketing team, it's not really sufficient because they can't use it, or it's not meeting their demands. So what they do, they go out and get a different data storage system, maybe in the cloud, and and then the data is separated, right? So we're seeing kind of these conflicts, let's say, in a couple of companies. And as the world is changing, of course, we're also hearing new demands, right? So what technology would you recommend as a feature store, right? So companies trying to adopt machine learning use cases, which eventually lead to demands in the change of the infrastructure, right? So a feature store is something that we've been asked a couple of times by our customers. So all in all, right, we see here a lot of problems which are kind of been here always. And the way we categorize them is in 4 ways. So one is the ability to deliver business value. The other one is performance demands. The third one is capacity and scale demands. And the fourth one is governance and quality. So being able to deliver business use cases, the system is not fast enough, the system hasn't got the capacity, and governance as quality is really about trusting your data. How can we trust the information that we're storing and preparing for our users, right? So one more poll for today, and I want to ask you, which problem do you guys think is kind of the hardest to solve, right? So I know that many of you have a lot of experience probably with this, right? And yeah, I'd like to know, which, in your experience in the past, maybe 5-10 years, maybe even more, which has been the toughest challenge for you in the past years. So some answers are coming in. So I hope you see them this time. So yeah, mostly yeah, governance and quality is currently leading, but ability to deliver business value is not far away. Third place is currently still with capacity and scale demands, and performance demands are on fifth. On fourth. So give it a few more seconds. So we got practically quite a few responses. Right. So yeah, I think there's a clear winner. Governance and quality. Governance and quality wins this. Second, ability to deliver business value. Capacity and scale demands are in third place. And finally, we have the performance demands. Right. So thank you for your answers. Yeah. So it's kind of the same problems, right? So the good news with these problems is that most of them, we believe, have a technological solution, right? So the technology is here, right? The bad news is is that since the world changes a lot, not really, no one actually knows how long this technology will remain effective for your business, right? So that's why I believe modernization is a topic to always look at, and it's quite important, right? And if you look at kind of the landscape, right, of what's been happening. So in the past we were very much focused on reporting, dashboards, getting the business decisions. Now we got this right, I would say, right, because one of the reasons I believe that this was well done is that you had quite some time to prepare that. When the business came along, they needed a monthly report, so you actually could go into the details, prepare everything, verify the data. But in this day and age, we're seeing operational analytics as kind of mainstream. So you can imagine operational analytics as daily usage of the data. Now, this functionality is now what we see is split across various teams, right, across the organization. So marketing is watching their performance metrics. You've got sales teams looking at how they're doing. You've got data science teams doing their stuff, merchandising, so across the board, different teams are having different requirements on the data, and with a single solution, it's pretty hard to fit and make happy everyone in this area. So with operational analytics, you need to kind of rethink the way you do the data. And some of the more progressive customers that we've seen are going into what we are calling shared insights. And with shared insights, these companies are actually providing insights and details and even data to customers, partners. So so they're trying to create a sort of ecosystem, and it can be anything from showing your customers your account balance, or a real-time performance of of machinery to maybe a couple of entities, right? So and the demand for the data is usually that people here in this section really don't like to wait too much, right? So more or less you have to count with real-time availability, right? So this is kind of the landscape that we've seen, and what's changing. So that's why we say you never know how long kind of these technologies will last for your use case. So modernization is important. Now, the question really is the change worth it, right? So I want to show you a story from last year with one of our customers. So we gained a new customer called the Merim Group. They're a customer out of France. And Merim is the leading provider of digital point of sale solutions for restaurant franchises, right? So if you would imagine, their customers are McDonald's, Burger King, and typically larger chains restaurants. And they are obviously collecting data out of the systems, which are in the restaurant. And we started working with them on some capacity and performance issues, right? So one of the topics that we just mentioned a while ago. And I would say, they didn't have a bad setup. So they were using, let's say, big data tech. They were using Cassandra, and but they, due to the performance issues, it was quite, it was quite impacting the business as such, right? So we got together with the CEO and we discussed, what we can do. And just buying new hardware wasn't really the way we wanted to go. It wasn't really flexible enough for their business. So we decided to move them to AWS, and we did so. We did a very simple project. So we kind of wanted to do a one-to-one copy of what they had on premise and move it to the cloud, right? And we managed to do that in 4 weeks. So if we look at some of the details, right, of that project, so Miriam, just to help you understand what environments they're providing to their customers. So they're operating these interactive kiosks. So if you've ever been to a McDonald's or Burger King, they're supplying them with the kiosk. They're supplying them with the points of sales devices, and they're also helping them operate the drive-through technology. Now, all of the data is collected into a local server solution, right? Which is kind of like you can imagine it as a kind of a caching system. And this is eventually sent to Cassandra. And basically, like I said, what we did is just we took that on-premise Cassandra, we gone through the basics and moved it to the cloud. So the data flow it currently looks something like this. Now, once we started to pour data from over 350 restaurants, obviously the space grew quite a bit. And I can say maybe in the last year, we kind of almost doubled the capacity since we started, right? So the system has been growing really, really fast, but we can keep up with the demands due to the scalability and flexibility that AWS can provide. Now, the reason why I'm saying this story is that this was the first kind of work that we did, and once we finished this, we started to discuss the possibilities that a modern data platform could deliver to them. So we started out building a new data platform, which would be a bit more flexible. It would provide good cost value ratio. And next to the existing Cassandra, we started to build a platform which was based on Kubernetes. And in that Kubernetes platform, we were adding certain database and data storage technologies, which would give us a lot more flexibility. Now, what's happened then is currently we're putting traffic onto that new platform. We're still keeping around the old setup as it's still connected to some legacy reporting, but we've introduced some new databases, and with that, we are now powering some new opportunities, right? So one of the new opportunities that we've been working on is a mobile application which is dedicated for restaurant managers. And the restaurant manager can see basically the digital events and actions of that restaurants, including some predictions in near real time, right? So very interestingly, we started with a capacity problem, and eventually we are now in a situation where we've created something that can bring potentially new revenue to the Mering Group, right? So I think that's that's been a great success for us, and this has just been done in the scale of practically a year. Now, we have a lot more case studies, right? So there's not time for all of them today. So I would, encourage, everyone on the call, if they're interested in some infrastructure cases, we try to put as many of them as we can on our website, right? And you can look at what we've done for Slovak Telecom, for Tatra Banka, and for Vodafone, right? So how to read through that, I invite you to our site. And the real question here is now, how to, so we've seen a couple of successes. So how do you build a data infrastructure, kind of that provides great value? So the way we go about it is basically we have these 4 steps. So we want to give you 4 recommendations that 4 things to think about when it comes to building data infrastructures. So number 1, and I've already mentioned this probably once in this presentation. So I think it's really, really important that you take a top-down approach. Start from your customers, right? Talk to customers. Yeah, if they're external customers, internal customers, it doesn't really matter too much, right? So that's the place, because they are going to be the ones who are judging and using your solution. But one thing we don't do is we don't talk about features, right? So this is what makes us different. So don't talk about speed and bolts and bits and things that at the end of the day don't really matter too much. It's important to talk about achieving business goals. So just to give you an example, kind of the way I go about it when I'm talking to customers about the discovery process, right? So my questions go something along these lines, right? So explain your role to me, right? What are you trying to achieve? Where does the data fit into your daily work? What extremes has the data shown recently? What happened afterwards, right? So along these lines, I always try to ask customers questions because I want to understand really, what is the real usage? What is the day-to-day work, right? If the data is important or not. And especially this last question is kind of one of my favorites, right? So I like to understand which data or which information or which events for customers are actionable, right? So if something like an insight can cause action, and that's definitely something that you want to initially focus on when it comes to data projects, data infrastructure projects. Sorry. Number 2 is stop looking for silver bullets, right? So what I mean by that is that in this day and age, there's no one solution that can fix and fit into all problems, right? So we still see some customers with a single database, right, trying to adapt various use cases to that single database. I'm sorry to say, it just doesn't work anymore, right? And it is quite normal, to have various data storage solutions, right? So I'm showing you right now here 3 of our customers, so Tatra Banka, T-Mobile, Merim, and comparing that to a well-known company like Spotify, right? So none of these companies have a single database, right, for all of their use cases, right? So they kind of change their focus for focusing on a customer and providing a great experience with the data. So for that, you probably use different sort of technologies, right? So sometimes Oracle is maybe good enough for you, right, at the end of the day, right? So you don't need to change that. But when a new use case comes along, you might want to use something a bit more progressive, right? But it's perfectly fine to have a look and keep different technologies. Number 3, understand the data and how it will be accessed. So understanding the data and how it will be accessed, access patterns are really important when trying to design the architecture, right? Now, this is an example of a machine learning pipeline, and machine learning pipelines have a couple of phases, right? I'm not going to explain which phase does which, but as you can see, and I borrowed this picture from Western Digital, which is a disk provider and a storage provider, and you can see that different types of actions have different needs for reading and writing the data, right? So here, if you look at the bottom line, you can see that various file systems have been used to adhere to that problem in the best way possible, right? And with that, to understand the data, there's also the emergence of the data catalog, right? So So and you showed that in the poll that it's a very interesting topic. So there are probably 3 technologies which we've played with and which we can recommend in terms of data governance, business glossary, data catalog. So one thing we tried out is called Amundsen. Amundsen is a project from a company called Lyft. It's kind of an Uber competitor in the US. And yeah, Amundsen is a very nice solution for that. Apache Atlas has been around, especially in the Cloudera environments, right? So, but it's an open source data governance toolkit and framework. And also, I'd like to mention that a local Czech company, Kebola, has a data catalog functionality, and it's pretty good. So, you might want to try that out as well. Now, number 4, and this is the last thing, and I think it's quite important, is to be open to new things, right? So definitely there is new stuff around. So like I've mentioned, there's the data warehouse as a service, and part of that topic is also the separation of storage and compute. What we're looking at here is 2 cloud options. So you can look at Snowflake, you can look at Firebolt, and I'm mentioning these 2 specifically because it's the 2 that we've tried out and we think are pretty good. So Snowflake, you've probably heard about Snowflake. Snowflake is what I call the defining data warehouse, and the reason why I'm calling that is kind of I would say they found the right sort of model, right? So Oracle has been around with the autonomous data warehouse, autonomous cloud for some time, but I think they have Snowflake has a bit more of an interesting business model, so it has support for SQL, asset transactions, all the good stuff. What I specifically really like is multi-tenancy and data sharing, and you can very easily share parts of your data with maybe a third party. So if you're looking into those shared insights segments, then Snowflake can be an interesting option for you. But we have come across certain projects which are where we've seen that they started to use Snowflake, and maybe Snowflake is not really a valuable option, right? So we found this alternative as well, which is called Firebolt. Firebolt, is so far as we've seen a bit cheaper. So they're pushing it mainly on the cost side of things. But from an architectural standpoint, Firebolt, I think, is really, really interestingly built. I think it's taken the right approaches, from an architectural standpoint. So you can put your data on S3. You can build various engines. So you can have an engine for ingesting, reporting, similar to what is available in Snowflake. But there's just a bit more choice that you can choose different instances, So I think it provides a bit more flexibility on that side. But they've just started out quite recently. But we're putting it to the test, so we'll let you know how that goes. Now, in terms of on-premise solutions, right? There's a couple of things I want to show you today. So we've been using for some of our projects ClickHouse and SingleStore. We're calling them lightweight distributed SQL databases that are ready for platforms like Kubernetes. And we're using Kubernetes as kind of our delivery mechanism for customers, especially in the enterprise. So if you've never seen ClickHouse, ClickHouse is a really, really interesting option. It's Apache 2.0, so it's open source and it's freely available for commercial usage. And it's predominantly good for online analytical processing. So when you're doing reporting, dashboarding, that sort of good stuff. And I think it's really ready for the enterprise as well. So it's got some built-in connectors, so you can do directly from the SQL code. You can connect to a Kafka topic and start collecting data off of that Kafka topic without the need to have an additional data ingest mechanism, right? It's got all the security bells and whistles that you would probably need in the enterprise space. And as you can see, some of the companies which are using it, you've got Tencent, Deutsche Bank, Tesla, Yeah, so very, very good software, which I would recommend, you have a look at. Single Store is very similar to ClickHouse. It's got two modes, so you can either have it as a in-memory row store or a disk space column store. I think it personally works a bit better with OLTP use cases. So especially when you're pushing in a lot of transactions, row-based stuff, which you need to process. But again, very similar to ClickHouse. But where it's kind of really shines is on the write performance, right? So if you need to write a lot of data really fast and have it available to your customers, then similarly, you probably want to use this technology. And the final topic that I want to discuss is something that we've been helping some of our customers here in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and in France. Then we've been working on Spark on Kubernetes, right, which is becoming quite popular. If you're using the cloud, there are obviously some commercial options like Databricks. There's an option from Cloudera. But there's not too many options for the on-premise environments. So if you're a company that cannot go to the cloud for well, mostly it's probably regulatory reasons, then we have a solution for that, which we've built out. So we've built out some Kubernetes operators where you can run individual Spark on Kubernetes clusters, combine that with specific technologies. Recently, we've done an integration with SAS, with their model manager. We've got an integration with Cloudera, with their CDP, with Oracle. So it's gaining quite a lot of popularity, and especially in on-prem setups. So yeah, this was a sneak peek on some of the technologies we use for some of our projects. So I hope it gave you a bit of an inspiration. And if you would like to know more about the specifics of certain technologies, then we're really open to talk to you about that. And yeah, and that's practically it. So we're coming to a close. So just to summarize what we've talked about today. So we still have the old problems, but we're now in a new world. So the new world is operational analytics. The new world is artificial intelligence. But we're kind of facing the old capacity and the performance and the governance problems that we've always had. Maybe it's just getting worse. Operational analytics, I think, will drive the data usage. So focus on people doing operational analytics when you start talking to customers. The technology is already here. So if you want to do sub-second latency queries, if you want to look up billions of rows in a couple of seconds, the technology is here. If you look at the Merim use case, the reward for making the first step may be bigger than you think at the end of the day. So with Merim, we went from fixing capacity issues to potential new revenue stream. And finally, the way to start and the way to go about it is start with your customer and work your way backwards, right? So that's it for me. If you would like to know any details or do a deep dive in any of these technologies or concepts, I'll be happy to talk to any one of you. So you can we do free consultations, in terms of discovery. So yeah, let me know if you found something interesting, and contact us, and we'll be happy to explore with you the options. And we've got 5 more minutes, so I want to open up for questions. So I'm going to look in the Q&A section to see if there are any questions which could be potentially answered. So let me see. So one of the questions is here, how to approach choosing a data platform and not to end up in the vendor lock-in. Right, so the fact with vendor lock-ins is you start with a simple use case, and then you try to And once it starts working for you, then you think suddenly you have a hammer, and everything looks like a nail, right? So you start putting more and more use cases on top of that, and eventually you end up with with a system which is becoming very difficult to let go, right? So it's definitely good to diversify the portfolio. And if you take the approach as we showed you, where one solution doesn't fit all, and you start with the customer, then eventually you'll naturally, I believe, avoid a vendor locking of such, right? So again, start with the customer, and eventually, if you use our strategy, then this problem really shouldn't occur, right? So someone said, did you also look at Dremio? What's your view? So we haven't tried. We have it in our backlog, right? But we haven't tried it yet, right? So I didn't want to show today any software that we haven't specifically tried out or used. So I don't have a opinion on that. But yeah, it definitely Dremio is a very interesting technology, and we have it in somewhere in our backlog of technologies to have a look at, right? So when the time is right, or when a use case which is suitable for that, we'll have a look at Dremio. I have a question. Can you compare single store to Kudu, right? So single store and Kudu are different sort of architectural setups, right? So single store has taken the approach to be a really SQL driven database, right? So it's not really a storage layer like Kudu is, right? So you can imagine Kudu is probably a lot closer to HDFS as a comparison, but Kudu itself doesn't have the compute engine, right? So if you're using Kudu, you need to also bring on top of that a compute engine which will actually fetch the data from Kudu and process it, right? So typically the good combination for Kudu is Apache Impala. So with combination of Kudu Impala, or maybe you can use Spark with Impala. And Kudu is maybe, as I mentioned, a feature store option, right? So maybe it's something that you can use for a feature store, right? Single store is originally built on top of MySQL, and it's using the MySQL parts of the MySQL engine, but it's very performant. So if you're looking for the whole package, maybe single store is a better option. So customer creditworthiness, right? So one thing I would look at this, if you look at it from a customer perspective, then analyzing creditworthiness is something that today I believe is going to happen more and more in the online space, right? So customers won't be willing to wait like very long to get their credit score back. So you're going to have to look at something which is typically very, very fast, right? But you have to be able to do that quick lookup on parameters which the customer provides you, right? So I would look typically, because this is kind of getting values of a single entity. So maybe a key value type of database would be best to do that, right? So if you want to stay in the SQL space, then maybe single store. In the key value space, we've played a lot with error spike, which is a very interesting option. So you might want to try error spike as an infrastructure option. And then in the cloud, yeah, there are plenty of options from Google, from AWS. So I would focus on latency, right? Latency is probably key here. So we don't have time for any more questions. So I would like to thank everyone for their time. Thank you for joining this webinar. Again, if you have anything that you'd like to discuss or have any more questions, feel free to contact us either through LinkedIn or through some different channels that we're on. Right. So thank you again, and have a great day. Bye.